Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says lawmakers are close to a tentative deal on the debt with White House and Democrats, but will it get enough support in the House and the Senate to pass before the Tuesday deadline? Joining us now for a fair and balanced debate are Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan and also Republican Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, Congressman, I'll start with you. You say Republicans are to blame for where we are right now.
Well, I mean, I think this plan is completely unbalanced. I mean, how could we ask $3 trillion, if that in fact is the number, of cuts to be made primarily to Pell Grants, Head Start, Medicare, whatever the case may be, middle-class families who've had stagnant wages for 30 years, and we're not going to ask the top 1% for any sacrifice at all to help us solve this problem. So I think creating that framework where these cuts are the only solution, I think, is a bad policy, and I think it's bad economics. And I think what we really have to watch as this thing comes down the pike now, there's rumors that there could be $1 trillion worth of cuts in the next 7 months. That is a disaster for the economy. To pull $1 trillion out of our economy right now, when we just had 1.3% growth in the second quarter, and to think that somehow is going to create jobs in America, that's a disaster.
Well, of course, we have to wait now because we're sort of speculating about what we know about the framework at this point. But we do have the basic contours. We understand of what they're trying to put together. Congresswoman, what you've heard so far about the potential deal coming together, does it look any more attractive to you than it does to your colleague?
Well, Shannon, the key to remember is that we have 14 million Americans who are desperately seeking employment in this country right now. We need to control federal spending. We need to do the common sense things that American families are doing all across the country. That's why it's so important to emphasize that the federal budget has to come into line, has to be restrained. So what we're looking for as the House majority is entirely reasonable. It's what the American public has asked us to do. We're looking for budget and spending cuts that are at least dollar for dollar with the amount of increased debt the Treasury has asked to take on. And we can't have new taxes. New tax burdens cost us jobs. They take jobs away. So we need to have those two conditions met. They're very reasonable conditions. They're what American families are doing, cutting down, restraining their spending. They want the federal government to balance its budget the way they have to do.
And Congressman, I'm guessing that philosophically you're just going to disagree on some of those points.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the possibility of a balanced budget amendment. It's been talked about a lot within these negotiations. Will there be some type of trigger or a vote at some point before the end of the year? What would the timeline be on that? Is there any kind of balanced budget amendment that could be drafted in a way that would get your vote?
Probably not. I think we are all elected to do this, and I think it puts constraints on our ability to make investments in the United States and to meet our obligations. Again, the ones that have been coming down the pike would set up a framework for cutting Medicaid, cutting Medicare, cutting these basic investments that we've been making in the United States. So if it's that kind of framework, I mean, I'll look at anything, but if it's that kind of framework where it's so focused on cutting programs that help the middle class, yeah, of course I'm going to be against it. And just to respond a little bit to what Nan said, if we're pulling $1 trillion out of the economy in the next several months, if we're cutting back the federal spending right now, that ultimately means teachers, police, fire, when this money hits the ground. Now's not the time to raise taxes, and now is not the time to cut spending. These should be put in place down the line once we get through this difficult economic period that we're in.
And Congresswoman, quickly, I'll give you the final word here.
Well, Shannon, it's clear that Democrats and Republicans from the House and the Senate have agreed on a substantial number of spending and budget cuts that we can make without harming the promises that we have made to our seniors, to the disabled, to our veterans. Nobody wants to see people lose in this process. We can do this right, and the American people all will win. We need to put that $1 trillion back into the economy so that people can save and spend and invest in the sensible ways that they're fully capable of doing. Federal government has to have common sense in charge, and that's what we're aiming to do.
If the top 1% is not being asked to sacrifice anything. Is that really fair? Is that the kind of country we're at right now? They're not. Everyone's going to sacrifice in the entire country, our vets, our military, the middle class. except for the top 1%. That is unfair and it's bad economics.
And many would argue, as I'm sure the Congresswoman probably would on the other side, that they do already have a significant tax burden as a percentage of what is paid.
They have the lowest tax burden they've had in 60 years.
Congresswoman, I'll give you a quick chance to respond. We got to close it out.
Tim, proportionately, we have a very progressive tax system in the United States. Nobody is saying that we can't improve on our tax system. We can. We can grow our economy and grow the resources that we need to tackle our challenges by putting more Americans back to work. That's what this is about.
Fair and balanced debate. We got to leave it there. We got to leave it there.
20 million new jobs. Bush tax rates, economic collapse.
Thank you both for coming in. We appreciate it. Fair and balanced debate.